1996 wasn't just another year. It was the moment a trifecta of deception went into full swing. Unconstitutional laws. The Telecommunications Act, specifically Section 704, stripped local communities of their rights to oppose cell tower placements on health grounds, infringing on the First and 10th Amendments. Illegitimate FCC guidelines. The so-called safety limits focused on thermal effects alone, ignoring a mountain of existing evidence on non-thermal biological harm. Suppression of Public Law 90-602. This 1968 congressional mandate required ongoing research and protection against all forms of electronic product radiation. Instead, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, was sidelined and oversight was handed to the FCC, an agency with no medical or environmental health expertise. Together, these factors set the stage for today's chronic disease epidemic, with skyrocketing rates of cancer, neurological disorders, and children who won't even look their parents in the eyes. This blog will detail why 1996's actions were never accidental, never merely outdated, and never legitimate from the start. Section 704 and the violation of constitutional rights. When Congress passed the Telecommunications Act of 1996, its Section 704 effectively silenced local authorities on health issues related to cell tower placements. This was more than a simple regulatory change. Violation of the First Amendment. Communities were barred from voicing health concerns, gagging the public's right to speak out. Violation of the 10th Amendment. States and localities lost their power to protect citizens from potential RF, radio frequency harm, handing all control to federal authorities swayed by industry interests. Why it matters. This move was not about streamlining technology deployment. It was a deliberate attempt to bypass democratic processes, favoring the rapid expansion of wireless infrastructure at the direct expense of public health and community self-governance. Fraudulent FCC guidelines ignoring non-thermal evidence. In parallel with Section 704, the FCC adopted safety guidelines founded on the thermal-only paradigm. These guidelines ignored non-thermal risks. By 1996, even industry-funded studies showed that biological effects occurred at exposure levels well below any significant heating. Prominent scientists like Robert Becker and Arthur Guy had demonstrated that electromagnetic fields could disrupt cellular function without raising temperature. Sidelined medical authorities. The EPA was originally responsible for researching EMF health impacts under Public Law 90-602, passed in 1968. But with the 1996 switch, an agency with no medical or environmental specialty, the FCC, assumed control. Engineers, not doctors, set safety limits, ensuring the standards were friendly for telecommunications growth rather than protective of public health. The net result. These guidelines were never legitimate. They served corporate expansion, not the American people. Calling them outdated misses the point. They were fraudulent from day one because the evidence for non-thermal biological harm was already overwhelming. Suppression of Public Law 90-602, 1968. Public Law 90-602 mandated the government to continuously research, develop, and enforce standards to protect Americans from harmful electronic product radiation. By sidelining the EPA's research and giving the FCC sole authority, mandatory research halted. Critical investigations into non-thermal effects were defunded or never initiated. Legal obligations ignored. This was not just a bureaucratic oversight, but a direct violation of a congressionally ordered directive. Collusion on an unprecedented scale. The coordinated effort to prevent further health research dwarfs other industries' past misdeeds, including big tobacco. The telecom sector enjoyed near total immunity from health-based challenges and tort liability. The chronic disease crisis, more than just cancer. It's not just about tumors. The epidemic of chronic disease in America runs deep neurological disorders and developmental issues. Children who won't look their parents in the eyes, often diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders, may be affected by the constant assault on their bioelectric environment. When the body's baseline is already compromised by continual RF exposure, Any additional insult, like certain vaccines or chemicals, becomes a tipping point. Cancer is the tip of the iceberg. New studies confirm morphological similarities between RF-induced tumors in animals and human gliomas. We're looking at real-world evidence tying EMFs to a range of malignancies, including deadly brain tumors. Nonspecific chronic conditions. Headaches, insomnia, fatigue, and cognitive dysfunction have all been reported in the context of RF exposure, indicating a broad impact on overall cellular health. Recent breakthrough studies, NTP, Ramazzini, and genetic profiling. National Toxicology Program, NTP, key insights. Realistic exposure levels. The NTP tested SR levels of 1.5 watts per kilogram, 3 watts per kilogram, and 6 watts per kilogram, reflecting everyday human exposure. Biological effects at non-thermal levels. Even at 1.5 watts per kilogram, which does not cause significant heating, there were biological alterations suggesting cancer risk. Clear evidence of cancer. Male rats developed gliomas, brain tumors, and schwannomas, heart tumors, findings that should have triggered an immediate overhaul of FCC guidelines. Ramazzini Institute RI study. Lower exposure, same tumors. The Ramazzini Institute replicated NTP results at lower far-field levels, similar to living near cell towers. Widespread tumor formation. Again, heart schwannomas showed up in male rats, consistent with the NTP's results. New genetic profiling breakthrough, 2024. Morphological similarities. Scientists analyzed tumor tissue from the Ramazzini Institute's animal studies, finding morphological parallels between rat tumors and low-grade human gliomas. Genetic overlaps. While some common human mutations like IDH1 and IDH2 were absent, researchers discovered other shared genetic alterations linked to tumorigenesis. Validity for human health. Critics often dismiss animal studies as irrelevant to humans, but these genetic findings directly refute that argument, showing that the same pathways may be triggered in both species. Together, these studies obliterate the notion that RF radiation poses no real threat unless it heats tissue. The science is clear. Non-thermal, chronic exposure is dangerous. Why most Americans remain uninformed, despite overwhelming scientific evidence. Regulatory capture. The telecommunications industry wields massive lobbying power, influencing the FCC to maintain thermal-only guidelines. Misclassification of RF risks. By labeling non-thermal findings as inconclusive, regulatory bodies sidestep any obligation to update safety standards. Media blackout. Corporate advertising dollars often keep mainstream media from investigating or publishing in-depth on RF hazards. Missed medical advancements, the untapped therapeutic potential. Ironically, acknowledging non-thermal interactions can also pave the way for medical breakthroughs. Therabionic therapy, for instance, is FDA approved for inoperable liver cancer and uses RF radiation at power levels up to 1,000 times lower than cell phones. Then there's DARPA RadioBio, a U.S. defense research initiative exploring how biological systems naturally use EMFs for cell-to-cell communication, potentially revolutionizing medicine and technology. By clinging to the thermal-only myth, we hamper life-saving research into how controlled RF frequencies could treat diseases like cancer, rather than exacerbate them. Action steps: demanding accountability and change. First, we need to update FCC guidelines immediately. It's crucial to incorporate both thermal and non-thermal risks in official exposure standards. We must enforce stricter SAR limits that match the latest NTP and Ramazzini findings. Next, we should restore the National Toxicology Program, NTP cancer research, resuming halted studies to deepen our understanding of RF-induced carcinogenesis. Expanding research on vulnerable populations, especially children, is also a must. We must end FCC regulatory capture by demanding transparent, conflict-free oversight and preventing industry lobbyists from dictating public policy. It's also time to amend the Telecommunications Act of 1996. Repeal or modify Section 704 so local communities can again challenge cell tower placements on health grounds. Reinstate local authority under the First and 10th Amendments. Moreover, we should enforce Public Law 90/602. The FDA must uphold its legal obligation to research and minimize exposure to electronic product radiation, including wireless devices. Fully fund and implement ongoing studies to protect public health. Finally, we need to promote safe tech practices, encourage wired connections, and limit device use among children. Spread awareness of prudent avoidance strategies like using speakerphone and not carrying phones on the body. The trifecta that took hold in 1996, unconstitutional laws, Section 704, illegitimate FCC guidelines, and the willful suppression of Public Law 1996's, was never a mere oversight. It was a calculated move to expand wireless infrastructure at the expense of American lives. The net result? An epidemic of chronic disease, rampant cancer, and children suffering from developmental issues in a world where their bioelectric environment is constantly under siege. Yet, with each new study, NTP Ramazzini genetic profiling, this grand deception is coming undone. The evidence is crystal clear. Non-thermal RF radiation is harmful, real, and relevant to human health. It's time for the American people to demand accountability, demand that our governing bodies follow the law, and demand that safety guidelines reflect the reality of 21st century science. Our children, our communities, and our collective future depend on it. Contact and further reading. RF Safe was founded to raise awareness on EMF exposure and practical safety measures. You can reach them at 727-610-1188. Ask for John Coates. Remember, the best solutions happen when the public is informed and demands reform. Share this information with friends, family, and policymakers. Only by confronting the truth behind 1996's trifecta of deception can we finally protect future generations from the hidden dangers of wireless technology. Visit RF Safe to learn more.